Today I'm going to talk about DevSecOps and my view on DevSecOps. And who am I? My name is Patrick, and some of you might know me from organizing the first DevOps days, and then exploring more new ideas around DevOps and now DevSecOps. I currently work at Sneak, where I'm like the director of DevOps relations, trying to make an idea on how that whole movement of DevSecOps plays into the whole ecosystem of DevOps. And like I said before, I've been there from the beginning. So it's now like 10 plus 1 years, and we're still learning a lot of new ideas coming out of DevOps. One thing over the years that I looked at was the fact that all of these ideas eventually get reduced to a certain technical thing. Like Agile moved to something that was about Scrum or using TDD. Idle was about using ticket systems, and I know for many people out there, DevOps is synonymous with continuous delivery and infrastructure as code changes. But I do think it's way more than that. But that is the overall perception that people have around DevOps, and so it makes me sad when I see this kind of blog post. Agile versus DevOps or DevOps versus SRE, and I don't think that's really the issue. My friend Andrew Schaefer over the years has talked about the meat cloud, about having an API to interface between different systems. And one could extrapolate that is kind of the crux of automation, making sure there's a good interface, a good protocol between different things that need to communicate with each other. Even more, a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, I was using a lot of serverless and increasingly using services for mobile or anything in a startup that I was running. And it's been really interesting to see where's the role of ops these days. We're not operating the hardware anymore. We're maybe not operating the VMs anymore. We're just using services. And increasingly also I found that we're just using that API, like Andrew said, to communicate with a service provider. We don't see the real people. We don't have to sit next to each other, something we've been advocating for years, Dev and Ops collaborating and sitting around the same kind of problem space. And then I kind of figured it out. We are still communicating, like Amazon, one of the first things they did when they had a failure, they understood the importance of giving feedback and making a status page. Imagic, for example, instead of just showing you the metrics of everything that is perfectly working, you can see the error rate of their internal systems in their dashboards, giving you an insight, a different way of communicating that we used to be doing that before. An example was Travis for me, where you can just go on to a chat system. You don't have to wait for a sales person to come in. You were able to talk to engineers directly on an issue. So another way of communicating. And many have seen the postmortems that's come out. There's obviously some kind of sales or kind of promotion activity, look what we're doing, we're honest about our stuff. But overall, it gives many of these kind of insightful blog posts give you an insight of what people are doing inside of the other side, and how that could be useful for you using their service. So for me, instead of looking at Dev and Ops as something that is done within your company, I found that the services that we actually use could be seen as a service provider, something that is outside our company. And that will be way harder to control because the bottleneck actually now moved outside. We get the flexibility by maybe changing your service provider quite often if you want to, but it's still a good thing that you want to communicate. One of the things that I usually do when I use a new service, I give feedback, and the engineers on the other side really like that. From a perspective that it's hard for them to get the feedback, and that's often a good basis of getting a good relationship with your supplier and giving those insights. So me entering DevSecOps, in the beginning of the year, and again I was blown away by all the tools in the space, I went at a conference in DevOps Paris, and all the booths were around DevSecOps, selling you the new kind of tool. And I know Sneak amongst them. We also sell tools, but I want to go beyond that. And I realize that for some people, it's almost like a religion. Yeah, you believe that the technology will do a very good thing, and technology is almost like a religion. But I think, in my perspective, technology is there to amplify what the people want, what the humans actually want to do, and that's probably double-edged because it could be used for good and it could be used for bad. So it's probably never neutral. And some of the examples are we can have this awesome installer, but we kind of, will it be used for good? Will it be used for bad? We can't really say. And in that perspective, I also find when I talk to people in the DevSecOps space, there is a strong urgency to control, and they want to believe in the trust, but not trust without verifying stuff. And that is like a different perspective. Why are you kind of doing this? Is it because you kind of don't trust the other person and you're putting up the barriers, or you're just using them as safeguards so we as a whole team can go faster and don't have to worry about when we break things in a good way? So it's a matter of perspective why we are automating, why we're putting these kind of safeguards in place, and even beyond the code or what we produce ourselves, we can take it next level. What do we trust? Eventually, whether it's your whole pipeline, do you trust the system that builds the system, and then that system that builds that system? And you kind of have to, at a certain point, go with trust. And the trust can be, betrayed by tools. Here's an example of something that makes your CI tests pass if that your tests are run in your build server. So we're never done trusting anything in a way. And it also shows that trusting something comes at a cost. And this example, a bunch on Cuttlefish, shows you that if you're spending all your time in meetings because somebody wants to verify and have the last say and just keeps verifying, it is a very costly thing. Because if you trust people in the system, they could be doing the right thing without you having to control the whole thing that they are doing. And to take it even further, what the things you don't know, if there's no evidence of you're vulnerable or what you're doing, it doesn't mean that you're secure, right? If you can't see anything, and it's one of those dilemmas, then you really don't know what to trust, and is that blind trust. As John Oswald mentions in one of his presentations, humans are part of the system, and the example he gives is that when you would leave your system alone for an hour, will it survive? And most people will answer yes, without a problem. And then you say, what about a day? Yeah, well, probably we have some systems. What about a week? What about more? Eventually there will be decay so it isn't just the system that the technology, it's the people that make it work, that change it, that kind of improve it to make up for any changes in the environment or any changes that need to be taken care of. So it's like a double system. It is the tools and the people at the same time. And even though we've been advocating automation for a long time, and I'm still a believer in a lot of automation, there are some downsides to making automation, and it mostly has to do with when we abstract things away and we don't do them often. We tend to get worse at it. So one of the game days that people are using, it's almost like the fire drill. You have to have these drills kind of on a continuous rate, because if you don't, you kind of lose touch with what you're doing because it's all abstracted away. And we want to make sure that we don't fall into this kind of irony of, we automated everything and now we don't understand it anymore. And if something happens, we don't know what to fix or how to fix it anymore. And at the same time, we have to be real by saying that what is our CI pipe doing? And in English, there's a difference between building up confidence or building up trust. And our CI system actually builds up confidence. Like we think historically, when the build has passed like 100 times, it will pass 101. But we can actually never be sure because the environment can change, your code can change, and everything. So it is not the same. Confidence is something that is based on historical level. Trust is something on a more connected human level that we try to do. And that trust is different from the confidence we are building with the CI pipeline. As John Willis has also presented, the system that we make more rigid to go through might not be the system that will survive the best. I've seen many cases where the CI system is becoming the legacy, that it becomes like slowing down to change things in the CI pipeline. Because the more you put on it, the slower you will get by changing. And if there's like a problem, again, nobody knows, or it's really hard to change the whole pipeline. So be vigilant of these kind of side effects of more automation. And the other example that I would say is on the day-to-day, even though we have our pipeline, if you look at all the places where humans can still play a role, like dealing with the exceptions or dealing with the harder problems, that's a good indication that we still have like technology and people that were doing it at the same time. And eventually, if you look at trust, it's one of the predominant features that high-performance teams is that how well do people trust each other in the team? And it has less to do on what tooling you're using. You could be using whatever tooling, but trusting the people is one of the important things on making an organization work well. And that led me to the Tin Book of Trust, and it talks about like 4 areas that relate to building up trust. The first is sincerity. Are you walking the walk? Are you like doing what people expect in that in your actions? And then there's reliability. You're doing the walk and you're doing the talk, but are you reliable? Will you do them every time? Will you make sure they are happening? And then there's competence, like how well are you executing? Do you have the knowledge to execute on what you're saying? And then eventually, the fourth is probably the most important, do you care? Because you can be sincere, you can be reliable, and you actually can have the competence, but you can still not care. And if people will immediately notice that, and that just reduces the trust amongst people for collaboration. We can even apply this like human concept on trust on how we trust external systems. And I talked about a little bit about trusting service providers. Another way is looking at like anything that we use from open source, from the community. How do you look at competence? So when we evaluate the library, we will go like the number of CVEs, static analysis, do you have all the tests? So they're all like looking at technical competence. And evaluating on the different level reliability, make sure that when you have a new release, does it have more bugs than before? What's the number of people kind of contributing? Is it still like actively being developed on? So they're all notions of reliability. And we can kind of we can fool ourselves, and sometimes we can buy things like GitHub stars or forks, and so it shows how fragile and how kind of fake sometimes these parts in trust could build up. But we can be sincere, have a code of conduct, and make sure we help new people. So it shows you how sincere this library actually wants to be. And then they care about the pull requests. Will I merge them in? Will I look at that? What about my language? So all different facets beyond just measuring the competence or the technical things of the library are considered while you select the new library that you want to install. And so similarly, when you look at the gap between security and developers that we want to bridge, when developers talk about this, they want to have security be sincere. They want to have them at their sprint planning and they want them to be there because they say they care about the business, but let them be there when it's discussed. And developers can also say that we can make security part of our definition of done, so making that reliable on what we do. And we will get better at security practices. Maybe we don't know yet. We can educate developers and make them better. And in the end, what everybody wants is that we care about that. So that caring, whenever I talk to people, they say it should be a shared responsibility and they should care. And you can have all three others, but if the care isn't there, good luck with your kind of project. And on the other side as well, developers want security folks to kind of be considerate on priorities on the backlog. It's not a blocking all the time, and sometimes it's a business consideration whether something gets selected or goes through to production, even if we know like vulnerabilities are in there. And these are just examples of how we go in both ways. And again, we boil down to care, make it a shared responsibility. Whatever we do, we want to, be involved and care about that. Great example is, that was happening at Etsy, and their usual process was about blocking different people when they would touch like a highly sensitive file. And they would say like, we have to have approval for 5 people. And again, it's the costly meeting kind of approach that they would take in the beginning. And they changed it to, putting up a warning saying, if you touch this file, you know what you can do, we trust you, but, we're gonna send this out to many of the folks, just by notification that they know. And that alone was good to kind of, people who didn't know what they were doing, to kind of shy them away. But if they did know what they were doing, they were able to do it, and they didn't have to wait for 5 people to approve it. Because face it, if that happens like at 1 a.m. in the morning, waiting for all the 5 to kind of wake up, and when you're actually the engineer and know perfectly what you need to do, that's a real blocker. So that's a shift in mentality of trusting people to do the right thing. And I'm not advocating to do this without competence or without tests and so on, but it shows you that eventually that is where you will want to end up. So it's not a binary no, yes, of being like I trust something or not. It's like way more complex, as we've shown in the example of the library. And one thing that will kind of hinder us is that we always think of others being less trustworthy compared to ourselves, and it also goes against us. So one of our jobs is actually to make ourselves more trustworthy, and we make ourselves more trustworthy by making sure we are sincere, we are reliable, that we are competent, and that we care. And that is what we need to do in the whole conflict, and not just say what the other needs to do. We also have a role, what we need to do. That's the others will actually judge us by our behaviors and not just by our intentions. So walking the walk, is important, that we show that we care about what we do. So building up that trustworthiness, that is for me the crux of DevSecOps within your organization. And yes, you can put tools in place, and yes, they will help you, and yes, you are able to automate that, but don't forget that you're actually working with people and they are part of your system. And as Deming says, the first step of transformation is the individual. So if you don't treat your individuals as you want them to be treated, or how they want to be trusted, or trust them in levels that they are, be helpful and not costly to your system, that is something to consider. So here's a little bit of homework. I touched already on the Little Book of Trust. A new book that has come out is Agile Conversations. I think it's one of the first books that actually talks about, talking and improving the day-to-day conversations we have from one human to the other in the whole process. And it doesn't explain technology. It's just getting better at building the trust, looking at our language to build that trust and to make that better. Thank you for thinking with me. I hope you have a good conference, and you can find me on Twitter Twitter handle is Patrick Dubois. And thank you for thinking with me, and have fun, and greetings from Belgium. Bye-bye.